Hello, my name is Arbie Parker, and I'm a senior ProjectWise consultant for Bentley Systems. And I'll be giving you guys this presentation for how best to take advantage of the automated publishing for your projects with the iModel composition server for PDF. Hopefully, you get a lot of value out of this presentation. So, why don't we go ahead and dive right in, shall we? So, first off, before you can learn the value of the ICS or PDF solution, you should understand why you should use it and what it's all about. First, it's a very flexible and scalable server-based system. It gives you the ability to create not only high-fidelity PDFs with rich intelligence, but it also gives you the opportunity to convert older industry formats of raster, such as RLE or CIT, for example, and turn them into something a little more user-friendly, or at least able to find a free viewer for things such as JPEGs and TIFFs and perhaps even CALs. But the best benefit that you will find is the server-side processing that the iModel composition server gives you for creating your PDFs. There's nothing better than watching the paint dry as your print organizer or Interplot organizer or MicroStation print solution or your Autodesk print set manager sits there and grinds away on your desktop when you're processing perhaps 200 to 300 sheets. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just receive an email when it's all done, and it's all done away from your actual desktop? So how does it work and how can we use it? Well, it's pretty simple. You're required to use three components that are mandatory, such as the output file format, which is basically to be your determination of what it is you're going to make. Will you be making PDFs? Will you be making raster, etc.? What the file name will be when it comes to the output file name. And of course, where will these new files go within your project work area? That being the case, you also can use a presentation setting, and that will actually dictate the rendering settings for that file. Will it be black and white? Will it be color, etc.? So let's talk about the presentation setting. What does it decide and how does it work? First, you can decide what levels and layers you want printed at plot time. Once again, you can decide whether or not you're going to use grayscale or black and white, a color plot. You'll establish the extents of the drawing. For example, perhaps you're looking for a shape, a cell, or you're using some of the newer plotting technology, using a sheet or a paper space, sheet models, however you want to call it. But that is all at your fingertips. And once again, you'll also decide whether or not what the paper size and scale will be when plotting your particular data. When it comes to the file format, it's up to you or the administrators of your organization to determine how rich and how much high fidelity will be included in your particular PDFs that you generate. Will you be able to turn on engineering links? For example, if there's a hyperlink in the file, will there be a hyperlink in the PDF? Will it be searchable? Will people be able to turn off levels and layers in the PDF like they could in the CAD file? Will you be able to make multi-page PDFs from, say, an Interplot organizer plot set or an IPS file or a flat set within ProjectWise? All of that is at your administrator's determination and could be at your fingertips. We also give you flexible naming conventions for your naming standards. Everyone here should understand the value of perhaps renaming the files at plot time. That can be convenient, and we give you the ability to do so if you desire. For example, you can use the physical file name that comes with the file, or you can use any level of attribution that comes within ProjectWise, whether you're using environment attributes or work area property within the project levels or work area levels of your projects. So lots of things can be determined to use to make those file names consistent, standardized, and flexible. You also have the ability to determine where those files will go. For example, perhaps they can go up under the same source file folder location where the CAD file comes from. Perhaps you just make a subfolder underneath it. Or you can use some location relative to the actual work area. Regardless, you have the complete control on where the files will be created within your project structure. And that can be consistent, that can be standardized, and if you need to, you can allow a wildcard plot or two if you want to allow users to browse to a unique location other than a standardized location that you decide as an administrator. But you also have the ability to not only determine where the files go, but can there be versions of those files? Should those files have environment metadata mappings? In other words, should it carry the attribution along for the ride as it had on the source file? Will the workflow attributes come along as well? And you also have the ability to distribute files at plot time. So as you're making PDFs, you can also distribute the source files into a different location within the ProjectWise system to be given to a client or another firm. So within the ICS or PDF product, you have a couple of ways to use it today. Simply, you can highlight some specific files in question, right-click on them, and choose the Create Rendition option. This gives you the ability to create a single sheet print of those files selected. But you can also use the Orchestration Framework Administrator tool to set up what we call a scheduled job. So that way you can set it up on a particular schedule or milestone or benchmark, and that way you can completely control the timing on when PDFs are rendered within your project system. So in the iModel Composition Server technology, we'll take advantage of paper space or sheet model printing. This will give us the ability to search for your sheets, whether we use a wildcard to search for all the sheets in a particular drawing, meaning one file, multiple sheets. Or we could just use the sheet definition variable here, the IP sheet definition models, to just print all of the models in the views of that drawing. And that way we can cut each sheet and then name it appropriately based off of your naming standard so that we don't accidentally overwrite each particular sheet model as they produce. Another valuable asset within the iModel Composition Server is to actually use the power of none, or what we call the none form size or paper size. A lot of you may be hosted MAS users here with Bentley, and sometimes you find yourselves in a situation where you may need to produce a roll plot, large existing prints that don't have a uniform paper size or custom size, which are pretty easy to produce and is pretty standard for most people. But if you're going to do it, what it requires is that you set the X or Y axis within your printing solution settings. And we'll see that here in just a moment. And you'll determine how much distance you'll print, perhaps in X or in Y. And we'll make sure that we have our origin set so that we print in that lower left corner there of the sheet of paper. So that way you can get the non-standard form size print solution that you're looking for, or just a convenient way to manage your prints without having to put in tickets for the creation of a custom form size with Bentley support team. Perhaps you need to cut some sheets here with some standard cross sections, and you're doing this with a traditional shape. Well, this is pretty easy to do with the ICS or PDF solution as an example, and would give you some custom flexibility on how that search order can behave. For example, if you go into the iPlot config variables here and look at that variable for the iPlot shape limit, by default, the shape limit is set to say about 50. So if you want to increase that value to say 200 to 300 sheets, that's something that can be easily adjusted here on your iModel Composition Server. We also give you another variable called the iPlot Area Scan Sort Mode. Basically, by default, it's going to go from left to right, so to speak, from the first shape it finds to the end of the line. But we give you the ability to change that order from, say, left, right, up, down to maybe right, left, down, up. You have the complete control over how that search order behaves. So that's just something you might want to take note of here in the iplot.config file. Once again, that would be found on your iModel composition server to make those adjustments. Another value that you will find here is to actually take use of the actual workflows that you're using to do reporting, perhaps with your insights data or what have you with ProjectWise, and use it for the benchmarks that you want for producing your prints or deliverables. So, for example, we can go ahead and take, say, a 60% or 30% approved document and run a scheduled search, or perhaps even do an ad hoc plot and have it produce those resulting PDFs in our deliverables folders with the state name as the folder itself. So that way we have it all nice and neat and organized so that we know this is exactly what we produced at, say, the 30% submittal or the 60% submittal or what have you. So we'll take advantage of some of that here today and take a look at how this works within the iModel composition server. Not to mention, there's a lot of benefit here in the new tools that have been provided with the iModel composition server. For example, from an administration standpoint, we've given you much more administrative tools. So from now on, you have the ability not only to display all the active jobs from the administrator tool, but you have the ability and flexibility to pause those jobs, to pause specific jobs that may be a lot larger. If you have certain files that need to get on out a little quicker, so you can pause and resume jobs. You can actually stop the service temporarily so that you won't get hammered with more prints as you're sitting there, perhaps doing maintenance on the ICS server. Perhaps you need to upgrade your MicroStation version or upgrade your print engine solution. So you can actually pause the server and make it not accept jobs temporarily and report that to the users, and then simply re-enable the services, and new jobs will be allowed to come in, and any active jobs will simply sit there and be paused until it is time to restart. So we'll take a little look at that as well today. Not to mention, we try to provide as much feedback as we can for the end user, just to make sure they understand what's going on with the product. So, for example, when they submit files, they will have the ability to be notified if they are in the queue, or if they're last in the queue, or if they're first in the queue, how many files, or rather how many jobs are ahead of them, so they can have an idea of when they should get a result. Because, the last thing you want is for a person to hit create rendition and hit submit, assume that it should be done by now, and continue to hit submit over and over and over. This way they have the information that they need to know that, hey, there's a job in front of you, or a big job in front of you. And if that job is too big and they need something pretty quick, they too can reach out to an administrator who can pause the larger job. So that way they can get their information out quickly. So that's of main value there to the end user. Not to mention, they'll be able to view any active jobs from their ProjectWise Explorer. So as soon as they hit submit, they can go back and hit create rendition and view active jobs. And once again, get an idea of where they are in the queue and what they may need to do in reaching out to an administrator if there's something that needs to be rushed out via the ICS product. The job list pretty much updates about every 5 seconds, so it should give them a pretty accurate idea of where they are within the print order. Another benefit to the iModel composition server that users would like to take advantage of is they've been asking for years now of a way to make multi-page PDF, but not needing the Interplot Organizer product to do so. So now we've given you the ability to simply take your flat sets and ProjectWise attribution to make multi-page PDFs, which is quite the powerful tool. So basically, I can make a new set in ProjectWise, go ahead, save those in that set, and then make an attribute or attributes and choose those attributes and what the order or print order will be through symbol technology. So I can decide on that attribute and whether or not I want to print it in an ascending or descending fashion. It's completely up to the users and, of course, the administrator to configure how it should work. But as long as they are using ProjectWise attribution, we will use that particular attribute to determine the print order for all the sheets for all those individual files. And you will end up with a pretty quick multi-page PDF file right out of the gate with the iModel composition server. So I think this is really nice. And people have been asking for something so they don't really have to use Interplot Organizer as much anymore. And I think this is the answer to that request. So with that being the case, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the product and some of the value that you'll get out of using the solution. And we'll take a look at the composition server. So let's take the time to take a look at some of the CAD files here in our particular ProjectWise data source. And if we start with a basic file here, perhaps our models.dgn, and we open it in MicroStation, we can see that this particular file has design models and it also has sheet models. And as more platform products create sheet models, we can use the search variables to go and cut each individual sheet out of this particular file. So for example here, we can switch between the various models within the CAD drawing. And we can use the ICS for PDF product to create rendition on these particular files. And you make 11 by 17 black and white sheets. And we'll use a specific naming convention, provide us with the actual name of the file dash the name of each individual model so that we get unique files during creation. And of course, we can decide to get an email upon completion, but we'll go ahead and hit submit. And we can see that the rendition job was submitted. And we can also see that no other jobs are currently in progress. So we'll begin this particular file immediately. And if I was a user wanting to view what was in the active job session, all I have to do is go back and create rendition on the file again, and it would show up here in our active job status. But since it's completed, we can hit F5, and this will generate a subfolder underneath, naming the file with the name dash each individual sheet model name. But perhaps we want to go ahead and create a settings file or presentation setting that will handle a non-standard form size. So for example here, I'll take a look at a particular settings file. In this situation, I'm looking for a particular shape that happens to have a color of 3, a weight of 0, and a style of 0. We'll use a black and white color table just to make it nice and pretty. But here, I will decide to use the none paper size, which is a automatic uniform standard size if you don't have a custom form size up on the ICS for PDF server. So by selecting none, I can decide how much I want to print in the X or Y size value. And I want to also specify the origin at 0 to 0. By doing so here, this will allow us to create a unique file based off the X or Y print access. So if we were to look at this particular file here in MicroStation, we can see that we have 225 inches in one direction and 55 inches in the other. So in the Y direction, we are 55 inches. And all of these files in question are 55 inches in the Y direction. So we can quickly highlight these files as well. Right-click on them, create rendition. We'll choose our roll plot settings presentation, which will account for the none paper size. We'll use the standard name. We'll generate these files in a subfolder underneath their location. Let's go ahead and hit submit. Now, if we go back, for example, and create rendition again, if we can do it quickly enough, you can notice here that the queue will tell me that since I'm second, there's currently one job ahead of me in the print queue, which has 3 documents in it. So it'll let you know how many files are ahead of you as an example. And if you need to reach out to your administrator, for example, to try to get them to make adjustments to what's going on the ICS for PDF system, that's something that's at your fingertips. So we can see that our PDFs are complete. So here I have, for example, our 225-inch by 55-inch roll plot. And here's another unique size at 125 inches by 55 inches MY. Now let's talk about cross sections and how that might work within the ICS or PDF tool. For example, I have a unique shape that's located here around specific files, as you can see. And I can zoom in and set up my settings file that will give me the exact characteristics of a particular shape around the files. So I'm looking for something on the plot shape full level, and we can see the characteristics of it here in MicroStation as an example, and we see its color, its line style, and its weight. So once again, if we make the configuration changes on our ICS server to account for the number of shapes that we want to print in that iplot.config, right now I've got mine configured to only do 50. We can go ahead and highlight the individual file itself, and it will uniquely cut each individual sheet. But we want to account for the naming convention because, once again, we don't want to accidentally overwrite individual sheets. So what we can do here is use the correct presentation setting, which will look for that particular shape. And in the naming convention, I've set it up so that it will append the actual sheet number to the end of the plot to give us a sequential name as we create these sheets. So let's go ahead and hit submit. Now I'll take this opportunity to go over to the Orchestration Framework Administrator tool. This is the Orchestration Framework admin tool that your administrator will have access to. But what we can see while we wait is that this particular file will generate 50 independent sheets out of that drawing. Now, while we wait, we can see here that we have the opportunity to highlight this particular job and pause it. And this would give me the opportunity to keep the job in the queue, yet let other jobs go past him. So for example, if I were printing, say, 200 sheets and we needed to get about 10 plots out quickly, we could pause this job. And the system will not distribute these files. The MicroStation engines that are still in use will still be in use, but I can still use other files as an example and print them and get around this big job as an example. So I can go ahead when it's ready and we're finished cutting sheets, I'll be able to re-enable the job momentarily. So to give you an idea kind of how this would look, I'll go back to one of our other sheets. Go ahead and create rendition. Submit this again. And from the administrator's perspective, we have one job that's paused and an active job that's actually running. So my smaller job will be allowed to finish ahead of the larger job. So as you can see, it got ahead and took resources from the larger job because it was in a pause state. But this job is still running in the background. And once it gets completed in cutting the sheets, I'll be able to start it back up again and actually distribute the files in question. So right now, I've only got about 13 sheets that were distributed, and it's waiting to send the rest once the job is re-enabled. So if we go back and look in ProjectWise Explorer, right now I've only got 13 sheets as it illustrated. And so now that we've gone ahead and cut the sheets, we can see that this job has officially come to a stop. It is paused because it's sitting there waiting to distribute everything, but it will not until we actually say go, so to speak. So if I say resume, these files will actually go ahead and distribute, or finish distributing rather, into the predetermined location, as you can see. Another opportunity you have here is to just do basic maintenance on your server. Perhaps you need to upgrade your MicroStation print engine or upgrade maybe ORD as an example. I have the ability to actually pause the service. If users attempt to submit jobs while the system is paused, they'll be alerted that the orchestration framework service is not running right now and is being paused. So that way they can reach out to you, for example, of what's going on. Or, of course, you as an administrator can submit information to your users just to let them know the service is temporarily down and it'll be back up shortly. But it's a great way for you to just make tweaks and changes to your server, spin up an additional server if you need to, and then quickly come back and just resume the service. Now, with that being the case, we have the capability of using workflow states in the ProjectWise system. And a lot of people may be using it, whether it be in a traditional workflow process or with the ProjectWise rules engine configuration as well. Either direction is fine. But what you should be doing is using those benchmarks, those workflow states that you're already using to take advantage of your reporting and your insights data, and use them as mechanisms to create your deliverables. So for example, if I continue to just select some files here, say 30% or 60% files that are approved, of course, I can right click and ad hoc them or create rendition and make a decision to generate these files and put them in a specific area within my data source. So for example, here I'll go ahead and hit submit. And right now I'm the first guy in the queue, so it shouldn't be an issue to get started. And what this can do for me ultimately, if I just go back and view the active jobs, I can generate a folder location based off of the workflow state name. So as files get generated, we should have, as an example here, a 30% approved folder, a 60% approved folder. And so we have a unique predetermined area that everyone knows this is where we kept or archived our 30% submittals. And this is where we archived our 60% submittals and so forth. So let's go ahead and take this opportunity to run what we call a scheduled job here within the ProjectWise system. So for example, I can choose to right click and choose start and choose between two choices here. Once again, if I set the schedule based on a certain time frame, maybe we run it once a day or once a week or whatever the choice may be for the user, you have the ability to choose incremental or full. An incremental job will basically run only the delta changes within a selection set. So for example, if I have 10 files within the search criteria or within the folder, for an example, and only 2 of the 10 have made changes, then 2 will be processed while the other 8 will sit there and not be processed in the incremental processing. But a full job would process all 10 every time. So let's go ahead and run our job here, our scheduled job. And once again, I have the ability to right-click on these files, or rather right-click on this job and choose to pause it if this is a larger job that we need to process and deal with, as an example. So we can see that our scheduled job is processed. And if we take a look back in our ProjectWise Explorer, we will see we have the 90% approved jobs here as well. So we can use those workflows metrics to go ahead and pre-populate our submittals and archive them on a scheduled basis or on an ad hoc basis. Is completely up to the user. One other piece of technology that might interest our users here is the flat set capability. Using our flat sets as an example, I can make the decision here to print files in a specific order. So for example, I can make an attribute that I can use, basically pre-populate with a spreadsheet or just fill them out or what have you, maybe even with PowerShell. But I can determine the print order based off a single attribute or attributes in ascending or descending order. So for example, I'll go ahead and make a flat set. So let's go ahead and create a new flat set here. And I will call it 30%. And I'll go back to, say, our workflows area where I've got multiple sheets. And I'll grab them in any particular order and drop them into our flat set. And so, for example, based off that attribute, it will print based off the order of this attribution in ascending or descending configuration. So what I'll do is go ahead and close the set, go back to our flat sets here, right click on the set, go down to create rendition. Once again, I want to make sure these files are at 11 by 17. They will use the base name of the actual set file, not the individual files in question. And I'll put them in a subfolder right underneath. Let's go ahead and submit. And we can go ahead and see this particular job in our administration tool. And what you'll notice is as each file begins to process and finishes, it will hold each individual sheet until all files have begun to process or finish the completion of the processing. So that way it can make sure it assembles the multi-page PDF in the correct order. Okay. So it's gone ahead and distributed our multi-page PDF. If we go back and look at our flat set, we've got a subfolder and our multi-page PDF, all at 11 by 17. And that was all done based off the attribution in ProjectWise and a set that we created. To prove a specific point, if I go back to, say, the flat set, and let's say I decide to make a change to it, I can swap the order around. We might make the 3D master earlier in the process. I'll change the print order to, say, 4. Make this guy 5. And our last one, 6. And it's not that I have to sort them by any particular order here. It really doesn't matter in the view. But to prove a point, I'll rename the name of the set and submit this again. This will process the same files, but assemble them in a different order. All once again based off of the ProjectWise attribution. So our PDF is finished. Let's go ahead, go back to our subfolder. So we have number 2, and we can compare. For example, here's our first file, 30% submittal, and a different order. Here's the second file, still once again with a different order. So very convenient, simple process that can be done with flat sets within the ProjectWise system. So let's talk about the distribution of files. So for example, I can go ahead and use the ad hoc method to not only produce a PDF, but simultaneously distribute the source files along with the actual PDF. So I could choose to distribute the source files with or without references, and that information could be handed over to the client or to a different firm. So for example here, if I highlight this particular elevations file, right-click on it and choose Create Rendition, I have the luxury of submitting a PDF for a PDF like you've seen. But this time I'll distribute the source file simultaneously. And this time I'll do it without references. So this way I'm just going to strip the file clean and only send what I want to that particular user. So if I hit submit and view the job, I can see that it's distributing the source files in question while making a PDF. So for example here, if we take a look and go back, we've once again generated a specific PDF of the file, but I've also stripped that file of its references and have it ready to be sent to a said user or firm. But let's do it again. Let's take this time to distribute this particular file with references. So I'll create rendition and choose to do it with references instead and submit it. Once again, we can monitor the job, and I can see that there are 6 or 7 reference files associated to this particular document. So all of the references are coming along with the actual master file. So as I finish the completion of the PDF and in the job, I can see that once again, we've successfully generated a PDF, but more importantly, we have gone ahead and established the creation of the references to that particular file. So now that we've completed our distribution job using the ad hoc method, let's take a look at how it would work with a scheduled job. The ad hoc method requires that a PDF must be made. But a scheduled job, I don't have to actually make PDFs. I can just distribute files. So let's go ahead and do this one more time. We'll clean this up. We'll get rid of our PDF in question that was generated. And based off of a saved search, we'll go ahead and run our job to distribute these files in question. But more importantly, we're not interested in making a PDF. So you can see here that 0 renditions are being generated as we distribute 3 files individually with no references associated with them. Our job is completed successfully. If we go back, you'll see that no subfolder was generated for PDFs, but I still have the 3 files that met the search criteria of the job in question. Hopefully, this has been an eye-opening experience for some of you. Let's go ahead and open up the floor for questions. And thank you for your time.